So Jack Kerouac is, of course, deservedly known best for his fiction, for his novels, in particular On the Road. But the Jack Kerouac who's particularly influential in the world of poetry and poetics, contemporary poetry and poetics, for instance, many of our Chapter 9 poets are very interested in Kerouac, is the sound poet, the guy who writes prose poetry, the guy who writes what has been called babble flow. In particular, there's a poet, Clark Coolidge, who's written brilliantly on babble flow. So what we're going to do now is look at 3 instances of the sound poetry, prose, of Jack Kerouac. And the first one is a little easier, the second one's a little harder, and the third one is kind of impossible. So let's see how we can do it. The first is a favorite piece of mine. It's really an essay story, more in the tradition of the novels. It's called October in the Railroad Earth. And we've read the first section of it. So Dave, what should we notice first about the writing here in this section?
The paragraph is all one single sentence.
It's one single sentence, which is kind of hard to do. And the way Jack reads it, and what kind of reader is Jack? What's it like when you listen? Allie?
It's very soothing.
Soothing. Anybody else?
Smooth.
Smooth.
It's jazzy almost.
It's jazzy.
And he's very charismatic.
He's a terrific reader. He's Clark Coolidge, whom I just referred to, the poet, says something like, once you listen to Jack, you can never get that voice. He calls it subvocal. I think he sort of means that it's in you, it's under your skin, it's unconscious. Okay, so we have this piece, October in the Railroad Earth. What's the setting? Where are we? Max, what's the setting?
We're around the Southern Pacific Station in San Francisco.
Yeah, Southern Pacific was a railroad.
Yeah.
3rd and Townsend station. And this seems to be a convergence. First of all, what time of day is it?
It's late afternoon. He says the commuter frenzy is impending.
Mm-hmm. Good. What's the commuter frenzy?
Rush hour.
Rush hour.
So it's like
Right.
about to be rush hour.
So do you have some phrases that indicate who's coming home from work?
Neat necktied producers.
Neat necktied producers and commuters of America and steel civilization rushing by with San Francisco Chronicles. What does that mean?
The newspaper.
They're holding newspapers like commuters do, yeah. Does Jack does he hate them?
No,
Amaris?
he seems to just be observing them, sort of detachment, a little interest, maybe some amusement.
They don't even have enough time to be disdainful. I'll ask you in a minute who they're disdainful of, don't have enough time to be disdainful of, but he doesn't even have enough time to be disdainful of them. They're not him. What is he doing, by the way? What does Jack do? What's his job?
He writes.
He's a writer. He's working on a book, we can see in this passage. He's a writer. But what does he do? Maybe to gather his material? Does he commute to work?
Seems like he's just hanging out at the station observing.
He hangs out at the station, and Ron Silliman, a Chapter 9 poet, who's also San Francisco based, or was, really does a lot of work with the convergence of classes that you get around a railroad. In Ron's case, it's BART, the rapid transit, but in this case, it's the railroad station itself. Who's there? Well, there are 2 kinds of people there. Who are they, Amaris?
Well, we have, I guess, the men in flannel suits who are employed and too busy to take notice of their surroundings, which is very much in contrast with Jack, who allies himself with the bums and Negroes and truck drivers, he says, who sort of stand in the shadows.
There's a lot of them there against the wall. And Jack doesn't have work. He does use the word working, if not working on book, but he swims out of it in afternoons. He's lazy, drowsy, lazy. So what is it about this kind of writing that somehow reinforces the content, which is hanging around the station at the time of commuting? Who wants to try this? This is a hard question. Anna?
Well, if you're in the frenzy of commuting, how are you supposed to write? I mean, he's got this drowsy, lazy afternoon. He can just sit back, he can observe, he can watch, he can just kind of be and let that being turn into writing, since he's got kind of the presence of mind of just being in the moment instead of, racing to catch your next train.
So an alternative American way of life an alternative American way of working, right? We saw this in Niedecker too, right? No layoffs from this condensory. It seems to necessitate a different way of writing and of hearing American voices. So what are some of the details of that different way of writing? Molly?
Well, I think the lack of sentence separation, the lack of punctuation kind of mimics that constant movement where it's not necessarily chaotic, but it's incessant.
Nice.
It's like stream of consciousness.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a phrase that everybody should be fined, $5 when they use it because it's so misleading. It's not wrong. I'm not saying you're wrong. It's just very misleading. But there is a flow here, and I want to quote Clark Coolidge on this topic. Clark Coolidge says that his favorite statement by the French theorist Maurice Blanchot is the following, and I'll say the quote, and you can try to translate it. Good luck. Here it is. One can only write. This is Coolidge's essay about Jack. One can only write if one arrives at the instant towards which one can only move through space opened up by the movement of writing. And in the context of Kerouac's babble flow, Coolidge says that statement is not a paradox. And so Coolidge says, so here's Kerouac whizzing along and picking up, and there's something special too about what you pick up when you're moving fast, about the kind of attention that you can develop. So does anybody want to take a stab at this? Max? You can do it, man. You've got the beret.
I have the beret.
You can do it, man. Yeah.
That's a tough one.
One can only write if one arrives at the instant toward which one can only move through space opened up by the movement of writing. That's not a paradox, he says.
It does seem like a paradox.
All right, if it's a paradox, go ahead, explain the paradox.
Well, he says you can only begin to write once you've sort of opened up a space with your writing in a way. So it does seem sort of paradoxical. But there is definitely a sense to it.
And Molly was talking about movement. That's what made me think of this.
Sure.
Molly, want to say that again?
Well, I was talking about the sort of the form of this piece, lacking punctuation and being constant and mirroring or mimicking the movement of the commuter station.
If American life is characterized by going from A to B, or in this case, going from A to B and back to A, B, but really career is you progress. And that's why narrativity, this is something Stein said about beginnings, middles, and ends, right? And the American addiction to that. So the narrative is you start here and you move to there, and it is a progress. Jack is doing something else. He's doing something non-narrative, but he's also lowering our expectation of the semantic sense so that we begin to listen to these American voices. And these American voices, in the spirit of Whitman, these American voices include hobos and African Americans who are unemployed, who are hanging around the station. It includes also not trashing the commuters. They are all part of the mix here. It was the fantastic drowse of drum hum of lum mum afternoon, nothing to do, old Frisco with end of land sadness, the people, the alley full of trucks, nobody knew or far from cared who I was all my life. Allie, when we were listening to Jack a few minutes ago, I almost heard the shivers. You liked it. What does it mean to you when he says these things? He goes from a very specific observation to this end of land sadness.
Yeah, that was a specific
You
line
love that.
I
Why?
definitely at. Well, I don't know, to maybe demonstrate why. It's just so evocative, and even though end of land sadness doesn't, it's one of those things that you'd be like, well, what does that mean? You totally get it. There's, maybe a kind of like loneliness end of land, but also just the way that he can, if you just look a little above, the way that in like 7 lines he can go from talking about the very specific San Francisco the commuters with their chronicles, and then the specific trains, and then all of a sudden there's mention of high in the sky, the magic stars right above the following, just this kind of cosmic image. And then all of a sudden, it's all like all of this is in California. It's all a sea. I swim out of it in the afternoons.
I agree with you. I feel the same way. And I'm just going to use, as a transition to our next passage, I'm going to use the phrase aural, A-U-R-A-L, aural continentalism. It makes me think of Whitman. There's a way in which he's got his ear to the American ground. So the next passage we're reading is from a book called Old Angel Midnight. This was a book-length poem, prose poem, a book-length poem that Kerouac modeled on James Joyce's Finnegan's Wake. So there you have a direct connection to modernism. And it's what Kerouac called an endless automatic writing piece, which raves on with no direction or no story. And I'll read the little passage, and then good luck. We'll see if we can talk about it. I'll just introduce a word that Michael McClure, a San Francisco-based poet and someone, a very close friend of the Beats, used to describe this book, Old Angel Midnight, and that's inconsequentiality. Okay? So I'll read the passage, and then you can talk about it as best you can. And I'm no Jack, so Allie, I don't know if you're going to feel the goosebumps. Boy, says Old Angel, this amazing nonsensical rave of yours, wherein I suppose you'd think you'd in some lighter time find hand be almond ya for the likes of what you devote yourself to, pa. Bum with a tail only means one thing. They know that in sauerkraut bars, God the chew and wall lips, and not only that, but all them indescribable paradises. Angel, my boy, Jack, the born with a tail bit is a deal that you never dreamed to redeem, verify, try to see as straight. You won't believe even in God, but the devil worries you and Mrs. Torian. Great gauzes, and I'd as lief be scoured with a leaf rust as hear this poetizing horse shit. Everywhere I want to hear the sounds through the window you promised me when the midnight bell on 7th Street did toll Bing Bong and Burroughs and Ginsberg were asleep. And you lay on the couch, and in that timeless moment in the little red bulb-light bus and saw drapes of eternity parting for your hand and begin, and so as you could affect and effect the total turning about and deep revival of world-robe-flowing literature till it should be something a man had put his eyes on and continually read for the sake of reading and for the sake of the tongue, and not just these insipid stories writ and insipid aridities and paranoias blooming, and why yet the image, let's hear the sound of the universe, son, and no more part twaddle, and don't expect nothing from me. My middle name is Opprobrium, Old Angel Midnight Opprobrium, boy, O-M-A-O-A-M-O. Pirly, sweet, swa, tack, tick birds, and firewood. The dream is already ended, and we're already awake in the golden eternity. Okay, who wants it? Amaris, what do you have to say about this? Anything. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but what does it do for us?
This is clearly a lot more babble than...
More babble flow than October in the Railroad?
Right, but I loved it. I love the musicality of it. And I think, as Molly was saying before, the lack of punctuation just frees us from this sort of machinic stop and start that the railroad represents. And here instead, in your reading of it, which I really enjoyed.
Thank you.
We follow your breath, those natural rhythms that are created in the language, particularly the consonants I was drawn by, describable paradises, and the Bing Bong and Burroughs, and even the believe Eve in God.
Nice.
Just those, you just focus in on those sounds.
Apparently, Jack rented a Lower East Side Manhattan flat and I think he wrote only after midnight and only with pencil, and most of what he wrote, he heard sounds of people, the sound swimming through his open window. So in a way, this is a kind of collage of people overheard. Do you have any sense of that in the reading of it, or in the... Max, how does that help?
Well, this seems to be compared to the piece that we just discussed.
October in the Railroad Earth.
October in Railroad Earth. This seems to be a lot more voices, a lot more fragments, more non sequiturs. And October in the Railroad Earth is a scene in daylight, so there is that clarity of California that he talks about. So even though it is very like associative and it has its flow, it's still sort of defining a scene, whereas this is, if it's supposed to be like Finnegan's Wake, it's more of a book of the night. And so these are voices in the darkness, and these are, and this is what happens when you're in a dream state, where the images and people are coming at you.
Molly?
There's something very holy about it. Max said dream state. I almost heard it as being sort of not quite prayerful, but not quite speaking in tongues, like something very trance-like. You have God and the devil, and the midnight bell is tolling, and the drapes of eternity. And there's something very sort of...
It's very late night, midnight, after dark. And of course, you said tongue, speaking in tongues. I mean, he's hoping that we will read for the sake of reading and read for the sake of tongue, capital T.
Yeah.
It's as if speaking in tongues was speaking with the tongue, speaking with the importance of sound. What about Michael McClure's word inconsequentiality? Anna, can we do anything with that?
Well, inconsequentiality, I mean, something that's inconsequential is something that just kind of occurs and appears.
Something inconsequential is not consequential. It has no consequence. It's not important.
Yep.
And
But
what else does that word mean?
Inconsequential.
It
Besides,
has the word sequence in it.
it's non-sequential, so
Non-sequential.
it's non-chronological.
So this is non-narrative writing. It's also unimportant. This is writing. Look at the beginning. We have this meta statement. Boy, this amazing nonsensical rave of yours, wherein I suppose you'd think he's basically telling us
What he's
amazing
doing.
nonsensical.
What I love about that, I mean, we talked about sort of more in the opening chapters of the course about how all of these writers are in some way going to challenge how we think about reading and how we read.
Right.
And when he says reading for the sake of reading, that's kind of exactly what this is. And Amaris talked about this a little bit at the beginning, that once you kind of let go of wanting to make sense of it and want to make narrative of it, you get to just kind of revel in what it says.
Sound of the universe, right? Don't expect nothing from me. Just when you don't expect anything from writing, you're in the sense that Blanchot means, you're ready to have writing essentially be written. So that's a good transition to our last piece, which is real babble flow. I mean, this is pretty extreme babble flow. This is a piece, a paragraph that's quoted by Clark Coolidge in that terrific essay that he wrote about Kerouac's babble flow. And I'll read it, and this is really hard, but if what we just heard was the sound of the universe, I have a feeling that this is sort of the sound of America, in a Walt Whitman sense. So here it is. Ah, rust, 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 die, 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 pipe, pipe, ash, ash, die, die, ding, dong, ding, 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 rust, cob, die, pipe, ass, rust, die, words. I'd as rather be permaganted in Rusty's moonlight rourke as be perturated in this bile arta panatolaire, where ack, the orshy rosh crouches my tired idiot hand, O Lord, I is coming to you'd soon's use readies and as can readies by Mazatlan heroes point out Mexico's, and all ye rhythmic bay fishermen don't hang fish eye soppy in my Ramadan give Diggerette sop of Arab squat the Berber types that hang fardels on their women. Backwood as leaf Eric some son with blady matter, I guess, is whoop a mule and sing-song pathetic mule jump field by quiet fluff smoke North Carolina near Weldon Railroad Bridge. Roanoke millionaire, high ridge, high party, hi-fi, $1 million fin driver, skinfish, rod, tong, apple, finder, John, son, Ford, goodbye, paw, mule, America song. Emily, what are you going to do with that? That's just sound, isn't it? Nonsense.
Yeah, but
Can you do anything? Is close reading possible of such a thing?
perhaps. I mean, there are enough words that we could try
Okay. All right.
But
What are you going to do with it?
I guess,
you read these things to close read, and the first thing that I latched on is America Song, and it's hard not to read that as a sort of both an ellipsis of how this could continue as some sort of America Song and as a description of what has gone before.
I said oral continentalism. How does that work, if that's a good phrase? Do you see some geography here? Do you have a feeling that we're rushing across America? We have North Carolina.
You do,
Bay
don't you?
fishermen could be San
Bay
Francisco.
fishermen. We seem to have a pun on Leif Erikson. Backwood as leaf, I'd as leaf, which is a way of saying I'd as rather. I'd as leaf, Eric, some son. There's Leif Erikson. What does that mean?
You get the idea of an explorer, of this like frontiersman that's
But
very
not Columbus.
American.
You get a sense of original, quote unquote, discovery, a certain focus on origins.
Well, and also with Mazatlan heroes point out Mexico's. I mean, I think of Cortez and the
And you
conquering
get Cortez,
of Central
and you
America.
get John Ford, the great American director of films, Americana, westerns. And then you get Paw, as in father, and you get Mule, and then you get American Song. So what does that add up to? Is this the sound of America, the way the Midnight writing was about the Lower East Side sounds coming swimming through the window? Is this that much broader? Dave, what do you think?
I think it is. I think right from the beginning it's so disorienting. It puts you in a mindset you can't really read this and parse it specifically. You just have to step back and listen to the cacophony, and I think it does try to describe all that parts of Americana.
And in some ways, this paragraph that we have here is almost more encompassing and, dare I say, a little more successful than Whitman's whole Song of Myself, which takes pages and pages and pages and catalogs and words to try and get at exactly what Kerouac's doing here.
Is it possible to say that this is the sound of what Whitman was wrapping his arms around? I mean,
I don't think
Allie?
I don't think Kerouac, and I shouldn't even say that, but I don't think it's the sound that Whitman was trying to wrap his arms around. I think it's just kind of a collection of many of the it's one kind of frame of the sound. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, I think it does what Whitman does, just kind of more condensed.
If this is a cure or a therapy or a hedge against something, we've been talking about Ginsberg as someone who did his little Madison Avenue stint and then needed to go somewhere, who felt the ground in Kansas. How does that work here, Dave?
Well, I think he's rejecting convention in a whole lot of ways. Like I said before, it's disorienting, and you're really in tune with the fact that he's not using formal constructions of words, of sentences. He's rejecting all of it, and I think it puts you in this really receptive mindset. Like one of the things he said, be receptive to everything.
And he's not being unallegiant, if I can put it that way. I believe he's embracing America. He's not ridiculing the commuters. He's just making sure that there is a socioeconomic and racial context that's much broader and that has more interesting sounds. I mean, this what I've called oral continentalism is meant as, I do believe, I feel powerfully that it is meant as a cure or a tonic or a hedge against the fear of the day that language would finally and totally become semantic content, which is that Madison Avenue fear that Ginsberg feels, that narrative became a getting somewhere for everybody, and that narrative and that American language became a commuting from home to work to home to work to home to work, and A to B, A to B, and that this kind of writing is a stay against the day that the music died, the American music. This is the American song. This is what Kerouac thinks is the American song. And I do believe that the Beats felt that the music had died, or that it was in danger, the American music was in danger of dying, and so they went out there to discover the sounds. With possibly a fantastical and flawed theory of language that it could just come, that language could be transparent, but a motive that is much admired by the poets that come after them.